So, first video in like 60 days, and I'm here with Pastor Ken Riley. On this channel, I've interviewed other pastors before, but I haven't interviewed a pastor who started out working in the secular world and then later on in life entered ministry.
Yes.
And so I just wanted to do that today. Do you want to give us a little work-life history for you, where you started out, and then around what years you entered the ministry and then eventually became
Sure.
full-time?
Well, let me see. Where do I start? I was, of course, raised in church, and also taught from an early age to serve in the church
Okay.
in whatever capacity. So that was ingrained in me from my earliest recollection. As an adult, I naturally carried that with me into the church, and always served in whatever capacity that I was needed. That was second nature for me. And then I married a girl who came from a very similar background. So together we started our life in that capacity. Served in a lot of different areas. Around the age of 30, 35 is when I was called upon by my pastor at that time to help with our youth ministry, which I thought was odd because I knew nothing about youth ministry. Nevertheless, fell in love with it, and this doesn't, I don't mean for this to sound egotistical, but I was good at it.
Okay.
And from there, that layman position then evolved into a part-time position, and then later on into a full-time position, all at the same church.
What were you doing before that, or what were you doing during that as a layman?
I was working for a communications company.
Okay.
And I had been with that company for a number of years. And so that was how I was making my living. But what was really bringing me enjoyment, if you will, was the ministry. And I discovered that the ministry really did bring a sense of fulfillment into my life.
How did the conversation go with your boss at this communication company when you started to be part-time at the church? Did you take some hours away from?
No, that was not a problem, because I had already made arrangements, even when I was still a layman, that my secular job and my ministry job pretty well cooperated with one another. There were, of course, times when there were some conflicts, but those conflicts were, for the most part, easily overcome. So that wasn't too much of a problem.
So it was your pastor who brought you, who was like, hey, we need you. Was it a need? And they're like, okay, here you are, or was it?
It was a temporary need.
Okay.
I didn't know how much I should get into that.
Wow.
At the church we were attending at the time, we had only been attending there a short time. And there's another story there. I really felt that there was a church that we needed to be at. Logically, it didn't make sense for us to be there, but I felt a confirmation from the Holy Spirit that this is where we needed to be. And the church had a youth pastor. He was a student, and because he was about to graduate and move on, he was resigning his position, and my pastor came to me and said, hey, we're going to be looking for a replacement. I just need you to be a substitute.
Okay.
Just fill in for just a couple of weeks. It shouldn't be a very long period at all. And as I said, I knew nothing about young people. I knew nothing about youth ministry. And so I thought it was odd that I was being asked. Nevertheless, because it has been ingrained in me to accept assignments. I took the job, and I remember a short time later, my pastor coming to me and saying, "Hey, they really like you. You're doing a good job. I'm hearing some good things." And I said, "Okay, yeah, that's fine. That's good. But I'm still, you know, expecting you to meet your obligation to find a youth pastor." And so it was agreed that, you know, I would stay on as an interim for as long as necessary. And the joke that we have is I was an interim for 12 years.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was a
So
long period
into your
of time.
40s then?
Pretty much into my early 40s, yes.
Okay. Would you, looking back at what you've experienced, have wanted to start that even earlier? If you started mid-30s? Or do you think that was about the right time?
You know, that's a very good question, and I think for me the answer would be no.
Okay.
Again, because I grew up in church, I had heard all of the sermons and the challenges about pursuing ministry as a young man. When I was a senior in high school, you know, I made the tour to Bible college and had all that put in front of me. And at that particular time in my life, I don't know, perhaps I wasn't mature enough, whatever the reason.
Okay.
It was not something that I wanted to do. I had no desire. I had no inclination toward it. And I think on this side of it, and knowing what I know about certain applications in the ministry, I don't know that I would have stuck it out. So I think that for me, I'm not saying this is good for everybody, but I think for me, it was the right thing to do, that I did not come into ministry until later on.
It's interesting though, the story that you're describing, it seems, I wouldn't use the word, I guess, tricked into ministry. Because
No.
yeah, the joke, the 12-year running as the interim.
Right.
At what point in that 12-year, because by the end of the 12 years, were you full-time?
No. Even at that time, I still wasn't full time. I think, if my memory serves me correctly, I could have been part time,
Okay.
but I was not. I was not yet full time.
When did you become full-time?
Probably not terribly long after that 12-year benchmark, because all in all, I served almost about 20 years at this particular church.
And so after the youth ministry stint, what'd you do?
After the youth ministry stint, I went into what was called an adult ministry position. It's hard to describe what that was. I oversaw the college ministry at that church. I was involved in the worship ministry at that church. And then I guess you might say that to a certain extent it was kind of an executive pastor position where I sort of overlooked other adult ministries, you know, men's ministry, women's ministry, that sort of thing.
Okay.
So that's kind of what that entailed.
And that was full-time by that point?
By that time, I was definitely full-time.
So
Yes.
how did you handle looking at it financially? I know I talked about this in a sermon recently, but we have our mega church pastors that, you know, they have multiple mansions and stuff like that. But typically when you go into ministry, it's not to get rich.
Right.
Working at the communication company, I'm sure they served you well when it came to finances.
Yes.
How did you handle that transition from, okay, good pay to ministry pay?
Well, that's a good question, and it was a sacrifice on my part and on the part of my family. First of all, I should probably say that, and again, this was for me, I don't know that this would be for anybody else, but my transition from the secular world into the ministry world was, I would describe it as an evolution.
Okay.
It took some time. I think that it kind of started out as an idea, and it sort of over time grew to a desire, and then from a desire to a plan. That would be sort of how I would summarize it. So we're talking about a great deal of time and prayer and thought that went into this transition. I do remember sitting down with my family, because by that time my girls were preteens, and just sharing with them that if I made this decision to go into ministry full time, that it would have a profound effect upon our lifestyle. At that time, my wife was a stay-at-home mom. It was not necessary for her to work. We had a very nice living, and there were going to have to be some things that would have to change. Teresa, my wife, was going to have to go to work. We were going to have to stretch the dollar a little bit more. There were some things like that. And I do remember sitting down as a family and us discussing it, me putting it out there. And my girls said, "Dad, you need to do this. We support you. You need to do this." And I remember asking the Lord for one thing. We had built a new home. And again, for the sake of my girls, I didn't want, how should I say this? They were making a sacrifice for me. And I wanted the effects of that sacrifice to be as minimal as possible. Mm-hmm. And so I remember asking the Lord to allow us to keep our home. I said, I can make, the clothes last longer. We can curb going out to eat. We can curb vacations. I can make my cars last longer. I'm willing to sacrifice all of that. But I want to keep this home. I want us to be able to keep this home and stay in this home. Okay. Not for me, but for the sake of my girls, for the sake of their stability. And the Lord honored that. He definitely honored that request. We were able to stay in that home. And my wife, she pretty quickly found a job, and that helped us a whole lot. And looking back, I can just see God's provision over and over again, that He honored the decision that I made to go into a full-time ministry. And even though I did not get rich, nevertheless, the overall sacrifice was pretty minimal, I would say.
So you talked about the conversation with the girls. In ministry, especially if you're married, it oftentimes becomes where it's when a church takes you on, the wife comes on as well. And we see that when we look today at 2025 and your wife, Teresa, she's heavily involved in church ministry.
True.
How did that conversation go with her from...
Well, I wouldn't have made the transition if she hadn't have supported it.
Okay.
And Teresa was already heavily involved in other legs of the ministry at the church anyway. And so for her, things didn't change that much. She's a musician, and so that's primarily the capacity that she was using in the church, and then in the job that she went into, that was the extent of the job as a musician. Okay. So really for Teresa, not only did the Lord open the door for her to take a job, but it was a job that she really enjoyed. So He provided well in that respect as well.
And so now in 2025, if you've started 30s to 35, you've been in ministry for 30 to 35 years, actually. Mm-hmm. What has been the most rewarding thing in this whole span of your ministry career?
I would have to say the relationships that I have forged, particularly during my stint as a youth pastor. I still have relationships with those kids, and it's funny that I would call them kids because now some of them are grandparents themselves, 40 and 50 years old, but I still have lifelong relationships with them, and am very proud of just the fact that I was able to be some kind of an influence for them in terms of choices that they made later on in life.
Okay.
So that would probably be the primary thing that comes to my mind is the reward.
Okay. On the flip side of that coin,
Okay.
what has been you look back, the biggest challenge that you are willing to share?
The biggest challenge.
Yes.
I would say for me, would be my family, my kids. The nature of ministry is such that it oftentimes demands time away from family. There's no getting around that. Nevertheless, a regret that I have from my past years is that I think that there were times when I voluntarily chose the ministry over my family. And if I could go back and I could relive those days, that is definitely something that I would change.
Okay.
And I would say a close second to that is has been the church politics. The company that I came from, the communications company I was in, that atmosphere was very political.
Okay.
And I hate politics, but I learned to live with it. And I think probably I naively went into ministry thinking that once I had made that leap, that I would put the politics behind me. Unfortunately, I did find that there were politics in the church world as well.
Okay.
That was probably a rude awakening for me, and I would say that that was a huge challenge for me, especially those early years.
Okay. When it comes to politics, just to clarify, we're not talking about like patriotism entering the church. We're talking about people position themselves to get
talking
higher,
about
climb the
yes,
ladder.
I'm talking about people putting themselves and putting others in a position, people using one another, and people taking advantage of one another, and deals that are struck behind closed doors that affect others. I'm sorry to say that exist. It does, and I don't know that there's any way of getting around it. I think that there are some pastors who thrive with it. I am not one of those pastors. I just don't work well with that. That goes back to why I feel like that had I gone into the ministry as a young man, I wouldn't have. I don't think I would have survived because I really despise that kind of stuff.
Okay.
I don't really like that kind of stuff.
Okay. And I think I kind of feel like I know the answer to this. You may have just answered it too when talking about the time you sacrificed with your family for ministry. But if you could go back to your 30, 35-year-old self with the knowledge that you have, what would you tell yourself as you're just starting that out?
I would say you need to make sure you spend time with the family. Go on the vacations. Close off the ministry for a period to spend totally and completely with your family.
Okay.
My girls have been very gracious as adults, and I'm very proud of them. But they make no bones about it. They tell me that there were times when I did neglect them.
Okay.
And so I would definitely do that differently. I think the other thing that I would do differently is I would not worry so much over others' approval.
Okay.
I think I did clamor for, I guess, approval or validation, and maybe that stemmed from the fact that I did go into ministry kind of in the midstream, and perhaps I questioned from time to time that decision, and questioned my ability, and questioned, all of it. Was this a good decision to make at this particular time in my life?
Okay.
So
Okay.
I think that was,
So, final question for you here. If someone who is seeing this video has been working in the secular world for 10, 15, 20 years, and they're feeling like, okay, maybe I'm supposed to make a transition here into ministry, serious, like more than just volunteering in a church, but maybe even taking over a church or taking over like a staff position at a church, what advice would you give them?
well, I think the first thing I would say is you need to be absolutely certain.
Okay.
Absolutely certain. And I do believe that the Holy Spirit can give you certainty. Talk to other people, get some validation, get some honest validation, some honest feedback from people that you can trust. I would say sit down with your family, sit down with your close friends, look at it realistically from every vantage point, particularly the impact that it could possibly have upon you financially. I would say that once you have crossed that threshold, then you forge a plan, and don't feel that you have to jump into something immediately. For me, the transition from the secular world to the ministry world all in was about 10 years.
Okay.
And I I think that for me that was the best way to do it. I think had I jumped into it any sooner, I don't know that the outcome would have been the same. So don't rush the process. Would be
Okay.
my advice.
Okay. Well, thank you for this time. Doing this video, I am hearing his wife actually making baby noises out in the foyer. I think we have a couple brought in their grandkids. So we're going to end the video here so we can say hi to the grandkids. Thank you guys for watching. If you have any comments or any questions on those kind of things, I work with this guy on a daily basis. And so if you have any questions for him, being like, hey, what should I do in this situation or that? Go ahead and comment, and I'll ask him and get the reply to you and stuff like that. But with that said, thanks for watching.
All right.
We will catch you in the next video. Might be next week. Might be a couple months from now. We'll see. But thank you for watching.